Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. Baghdad, early January 2020. A dramatic drone strike lights up the night.
And the target, a really significant figure, Qasem Soleimani.
Known as the Shadow Commander, head of Iran's Quds Force, a man described quite starkly as having the blood of hundreds on his hands.
But what was also really striking, almost strange, was the reaction, or lack of it, from Israel.
Right, the sort of deafening silence. Very unlike them, they usually hint, don't they?
Exactly. Which tells you something in itself. Soleimani wasn't just another military commander. He was really an architect of Iran's regional strategy.
So that's what we want to unpack in this deep dive. We'll look at his rise, why the U.S. and Israel saw him as such a critical and elusive target for so long.
And the specific chain of events, the decisions that led right up to that drone strike.
Plus the immediate aftermath, the ripple effects. We want to give you, our listeners, a really clear, well-informed picture of this whole complex story.
Okay, so to understand Soleimani, you really have to go back to 2003.
The U.S. invasion of Iraq, a moment of huge upheaval.
Huge. And Soleimani was brilliant at exploiting that kind of chaos. Saddam Hussein falls. There's a power vacuum.
Yeah, and he steps in.
Immediately. He starts funneling training, money, weapons to Shiite militias. He used that shared Shiite identity very effectively to gain influence.
And how did that play out on the ground for the U.S. forces, I mean?
Well, it became deadly very quickly. He turned those militias against the Americans. We're talking about lethal roadside bombs, the EFPs.
Those were devastating.
Incredibly. Between 2005 and 2011, they killed at least 196 American service members, wounded over 900 more. It was directly linked back to him.
So the U.S. knew who was behind it?
Oh, yes. By 2007, the U.S. Treasury had formally designated him a terror entity. They knew exactly what he was doing. He was essentially turning Iraq into a key base for Iranian influence.
Yet, despite knowing all this, despite the casualties, the U.S. held back from targeting him directly for years. Why? What was the thinking there?
It's complicated. There was this kind of unwritten rule, informal policy, against assassinating senior government officials of other states.
Even someone designated a terrorist?
Even then.
Right.
Partly, it was about international law, potential violations, but maybe more pragmatically, it was fear of retaliation.
Retaliation against U.S. personnel.
Exactly. They knew taking out someone like Soleimani would almost certainly trigger a severe response.
Are there specific instances where they had a chance but pulled back?
Yes, definitely. General Stanley McChrystal, back in 2007, he had Soleimani's convoy in his sights, but decided against the strike.
Why?
His reasoning was clear. Avoid a firefight, avoid the political storm that would follow. It was seen as too risky, too escalatory.
And President Obama faced a similar decision later on.
He did in 2011, even after Soleimani was accused of masterminding a plot to kill the Saudi ambassador right there in Washington, D.C.
Wow. So even that wasn't enough to push them over the edge.
No.
Yeah.
The calculation, again, was that the risk of blowing things up was just too high. And meanwhile, as U.S. forces drew down, Soleimani's influence in Iraq just grew and grew. It became, as some said, practically an Iranian satellite.
Okay, so the U.S. was hesitant. But Israel must have seen him very differently.
Oh, completely differently. For Israel, he wasn't some distant problem. He was an immediate, multi-front threat right on their doorstep.
A direct threat.
Absolutely. The Mossad chief at the time, Yossi Cohen, was reportedly obsessed with him. He saw Soleimani as this almost mythical figure, a legend, the ultimate chess master.
And Soleimani had a specific strategy aimed at Israel.
Yes, a grand strategy. He called it the Ring of Fire. The idea was to encircle Israel with proxies armed with advanced weapons.
A ring of fire. That sounds ominous. What did it actually involve?
It involved systematically building up Iran's allies. Hezbollah in Lebanon was key. Iran helped found them back in the 80s, and they were crucial in pushing Israel out of South Lebanon in 2000.
And Hezbollah remained a major part of his plan. I remember the Karine A incident.
Yes, the Karine A, 2001, a perfect example. That was Soleimani working with Hezbollah, trying to smuggle 50 tons of weapons into Gaza.
50 tons,
yeah.
Including rockets.
Including rockets, yes. And you have to remember, this was before Israel had Iron Dome up and running. It was literally just an idea on paper then.
So if that shipment had gotten through...
it would have been a game changer.
Wow.
A massive new threat from Gaza, with Israel having very little defense against it. It really showed his boldness.
And he didn't stop there. Even after the 2006 Lebanon war.
He was deeply involved in that war. Reports say he was actually in Hezbollah's underground command bunker during the fighting, even helped get their leader, Nasrallah, to safety.
Really? On the ground?
That's what the sources suggest. And after the war, he doubled down, overseeing the buildup of Hezbollah's rocket arsenal. We're talking maybe 100,000, even 150,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel.
Enough to reach sensitive sites.
Some apparently had the range to hit Dimona, Israel's nuclear facility. And think about this. In 2008, Prime Minister Olmert reportedly had both Soleimani and Hezbollah's military chief, Imad Muniyeh, in Mossad sites.
Together.
Olmert called off the strike. Soleimani walked away. Another near miss. Muniyeh was later killed, but Soleimani survived.
Incredible. So even surviving that didn't deter him. Syria then becomes the next big piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. The Syrian civil war, starting in 2011, was a massive opportunity for him. Iran propped up the Assad regime.
And can return.
In return, Soleimani got permission for the Quds Force to build its own bases inside Syria.
Bases specifically to threaten Israel.
Precisely. For drones, for rockets. Suddenly, Soleimani had created another active front against Israel, alongside Lebanon and Gaza.
So this wasn't just opportunistic arming of allies. There was a bigger picture.
A much bigger picture. The ultimate goal was what some call the Shiite Crescent, a land bridge.
Stretching from Iran.
All the way from Iran, through Iraq, through Syria, right into Lebanon. A continuous corridor.
Allowing free movement of troops and weapons.
Exactly. IRGC forces, advanced missiles, everything. It would completely surround Israel with serious threats on multiple borders simultaneously.
How would that compare to past threats Israel faced?
Some analysts argued it was potentially even graver than the conventional multi-front war they faced in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, because this involved missiles and drones directly hitting the Israeli homeland from several directions.
Okay, so the stakes are incredibly high. This leads into that period from around 2017 to 2020, what Israel called the campaign between wars.
Right, a constant shadow war. Iran trying to solidify that land bridge, move in precision missiles.
And Israel hitting back.
Thousands of strikes by the Israeli Air Force, operations by Mossad trying to disrupt that buildup. It was relentless.
And even during this intense campaign, Soleimani himself remained hard to pin down.
Incredibly elusive. There was another incident in Abu Kamal, eastern Syria. The IDF chief of staff at the time, Gadi Eisenkot, later revealed Soleimani was there on the ground during an Israeli operation.
And they missed him again?
He survived by some miracle, as Eisenkot put it. It just shows how good his operational security was.
Meanwhile, things are shifting in Washington. The Trump administration comes in.
And Israeli officials see an opening. They start really pressing the case against Soleimani with the new administration.
Constantly feeding intelligence, highlighting the danger.
Constantly. Yossi Cohen, the Mossad chief, saw himself as a key player here, really pushing the Americans, urging them to take more drastic action.
And did it work? Was the Trump administration receptive?
There were definitely figures who were receptive. Mike Pompeo, when he was CIA director in 2017, apparently told his people to start drawing up options for taking Soleimani out.
And he wasn't worried about the legality.
His instruction was reportedly, don't worry about if it's legal. That's a question for the lawyers. Pretty blunt.
But there was pushback internally.
Oh, yeah. Significant pushback. From the Pentagon, from parts of the intelligence community, even initially from Trump himself.
Why the hesitation there?
Huge concerns about the fallout. Fears of sparking a wider war, maybe even some worried a nuclear war scenario down the line. Retaliation against allies like Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Attacks on oil infrastructure, embassies.
Like Benghazi.
That was definitely a concern. Plus, Trump still held out hope, for a while at least, that he could negotiate a better nuclear deal with Iran. Taking out Soleimani could kill that possibility.
So what finally broke the deadlock? What pushed the administration and Trump to act?
It seems it was Iran's own actions in 2019. As one official said, the Iranians chose to do a whole host of things, extremely provocative and aggressive.
Like what? What were the key provocations?
Well, there were over a dozen rocket attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq by Iranian-backed militias like Kataib Hezbollah. Soleimani's Quds Force was seen as directing these.
Okay. What else?
Then in June 2019, they shot down a huge, very expensive U.S. surveillance drone, a Global Hawk.
That must have gotten their attention.
Big time. And then in September, Iranian missiles hit a major Saudi oil facility at Abqaiq. These weren't pinprick attacks. These were serious escalations.
But Trump's initial responses were still somewhat inconsistent, right?
They were. He'd authorized some minor retaliatory strikes, then pull back. He seemed to prefer sanctions. There was this struggle finding a response that wasn't too weak, but also didn't ignite a full-blown conflict.
Until December 2019.
December 27th. That seems to be the turning point. Kataib Hezbollah launches a barrage of rockets at an Iraqi base near Kirkuk.
And this time, there were American casualties.
Yes. An American contractor was killed, 4 servicemen wounded. That crossed the line.
For Trump specifically.
It seems so. Reports suggest this attack finally convinced him that sanctions weren't enough. He wanted a more significant response. He wanted, as they apparently put it, a bigger fish.
So this leads to those crucial meetings and calls in very late December, early January 2020.
Right. Top officials involved Pompeo, Secretary of Defense Esper,
Yeah.
and Trump's overriding concern apparently was preventing an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad.
The Benghazi comparison again.
Exactly. He didn't want a repeat of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then came new intelligence.
What did it say?
It placed Soleimani in Damascus, planning to fly to Baghdad very soon. And crucially, the intelligence suggested he was going there to personally orchestrate multiple imminent attacks against Americans, attacks with potentially heavy consequences.
So the threat felt immediate.
Very immediate. And then came what many see as the pivotal moment in the decision-making.
Which was?
CIA Director Gina Haspel was asked for her assessment. She gave a very concise, very confident statement.
What did she say?
She said, "The risk of doing nothing is greater than the risk of doing something."
Wow. That's decisive.
According to Esper, that was the decisive moment for Trump. After that, the discussion shifted to how to do it.
And the drone strike at the airport was chosen. Why that option?
It was seen as having the best chance of success with the lowest risk of civilian casualties compared to, say, a strike in a more populated area.
Before we get to the strike itself, there was that weird story about a foiled plot in 2019, an Iranian claim.
Ah, yes. The head of IRGC intelligence, Hossein Tayeb, claimed they'd stopped a plot to kill Soleimani in his home province. Supposedly involved digging a tunnel under a prayer hall and planting a huge bomb.
Did Western intelligence buy it?
Not really. Yossi Cohen, the Mossad chief, publicly dismissed the details as sounding amateurish. The feeling was it might have been based on a vague threat, or maybe even fabricated by Iran for PR purposes.
Right.
Hard to know for sure.
Okay, so fast forward to January 3rd, 2020. The real operation is greenlit. Soleimani is flying from Damascus to Baghdad. This guy was notoriously careful about security, constantly switching phones. How did they track him?
This is where the intelligence work was apparently quite extraordinary. It seems to have been a joint U.S.-Israeli effort.
Oh, so?
Reportedly, Israeli intelligence got a tip about a specific courier who bought untraceable, clean phones for Soleimani and his team in a certain market.
Okay.
The CIA then managed to get spyware onto some phones that were planted in that same market, hoping the courier would buy one.
And did he?
It seems he did, because then Israeli intelligence was reportedly able to provide the actual phone numbers Soleimani was using in real time during his flight directly to U.S. Special Operations Command.
Even as he switched phones.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
It allowed the U.S. to track his exact location right up to the moment he landed in Baghdad. A remarkable piece of intelligence fusion.
Just incredible detail.
Yeah.
So that's the tracking sorted. What about the preparations on the ground in Baghdad?
They had assets in place. 3 Kurdish operatives, reportedly. One posed as a ground controller, one as a baggage handler, another as Iraqi police. Their job was to provide positive visual ID.
Eyes on the target.
Exactly. And nearby, along the airport exit road, U.S. Delta Force snipers were positioned, disguised as road maintenance workers. They set up a kill zone.
Okay, lay out the final moments for us. The plane lands.
Soleimani's plane lands. 3 American Reaper drones are circling overhead. He gets off the plane, meets Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, a very powerful Iraqi militia leader, also a target.
They get into vehicles.
They get into a sedan. Another security vehicle, a minivan, follows them. They start driving away from the airport.
And back in the U.S.
Senior officials are watching this unfold live. Trump at Mar-a-Lago, Haspel at CIA headquarters in Langley.
Real-time command and control.
Absolutely. And then came that chilling countdown from the command center. Someone informing the leadership, "Sir, they have 2 minutes and 11 seconds to live."
And then the strike itself?
The drones unleash Hellfire missiles. The first strike hits the sedan carrying Soleimani and Mohandes. Obliterates it instantly.
What about the second vehicle?
The minivan saw the explosion, tried to speed away, but drove right into the kill zone set up by the Delta Force team.
So they were hit too?
Yes. A second drone strike hit the minivan, and reports say the Delta snipers also opened fire. Both vehicles were completely destroyed, engulfed in flames.
Any survivors?
No survivors. That was the immediate assessment. Trump was reportedly told, simply, "They're gone, sir."
A dramatic end. What was the immediate feeling in U.S. military circles afterwards? Celebration.
Apparently not. More like a somber mood, a sense of apprehension, really. Deep concern about what Iran's response would be.
And Iran did respond.
They did. 5 days later, January 8th, they launched a barrage of ballistic missiles at two Iraqi bases housing U.S. troops, Al-Assad and Erbil.
Was anyone killed?
No U.S. troops were killed, remarkably. Dozens suffered traumatic brain injuries from the blasts, but no fatalities. And importantly, there was no attack on the U.S. embassy.
So a significant response, but perhaps calibrated to avoid triggering an all-out war.
That's how many analysts interpreted it. A way for Iran to retaliate forcefully, save face, but without crossing a line that would lead to uncontrollable escalation.
Though looking at the aftermath, Soleimani is gone. What did this mean for the Quad's force, for his whole regional project? He was replaced, right?
Yes, by his deputy, Major General Esmail Ghani.
And how did he compare? Was he seen as capable of filling Soleimani's shoes?
The consensus, especially from people like Yossi Cohen, was not really. Ghani's experience was mostly in Afghanistan and Pakistan. He didn't have Soleimani's deep connections or charisma across the Arab Middle East.
So Cohen saw Soleimani as unique.
He called him irreplaceable. He believed Soleimani's death would seriously degrade the IRGC's ability to act boldly and creatively, especially in high-risk situations.
So the Ring of Fire strategy wouldn't just disappear, but it would be hampered.
Exactly. The assessment was that Iran's efforts would continue, but they'd be slowed and managed in a much less agile manner. Losing Soleimani, the master strategist and networker, was a major blow, even if the overall policy remained.
So wrapping this up, it's clear that while Israel didn't pull the trigger, their role was significant over the long term.
Undeniably. Years of intelligence sharing, years of persistently making the case to the U.S. about the danger Soleimani posed, that untiring and steadfast advocacy, as one source put it.
It all contributed to the context in which the final decision was made.
Absolutely. It's a stark example of how intelligence and relentless diplomatic pressure can eventually lead to a very kinetic outcome. After years of him being the #1 target, Cohen and Israel had finally, indirectly, gotten their man.
It really has been a fascinating deep dive. We've traced Soleimani's rise, the complex reasons he became such a monumental target, the geopolitical chess game, the near misses, and finally, that dramatic strike and its consequences.
A story with so many layers.
Definitely. And as we finish, here's something for you, our listeners, to think about. We saw the immediate impact of removing a figure like Soleimani. But what does an assassination like this truly tell us about the long-term effectiveness of targeting key individuals in these kinds of conflicts? Does it fundamentally change the game or just the players? And how might it shape the future of proxy wars and clandestine operations in the Middle East and beyond?